Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name's Leora and I talk on here about books, reading, writing and sometimes other stuff as well. And today I'm going to be discussing 10 romance books for you to fall in love with this spring. So these are some of the books I'm going to be discussing. It was a very dangerous move to put my mug on top of it, but it's almost empty anyway, so we're good. This list is both comprised of books I've already read and some books I still have to read that are on my TBR that I would really like to read this spring. I've been getting back into my romance era and I've also read some romantasy lately. There's also a book on this list that I think is technically romantasy. So the first book on this list is one I read back in 2021, but it's a book that I've been seeing around a bit more lately. But the book I'm talking about is Half a Soul by Olivia Altwater. Now this is a fantasy novel set in Regency England and the setting is lovely. I really enjoyed all the beautiful ballrooms and shops that the main character goes into in this book. So if you love a good atmosphere in the book, this is immediately a great recommendation for you. I'll, by the way, also link some older videos up here where I discussed this book originally when it was still fresh in my mind, because maybe you'll be able to grasp better from there, because I don't know how good of a job I'm gonna do now a few years later, like 3 years already. Oh my god, how has it been 3 years? This book actually reminds me a lot of Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies as well. I hadn't read that back then, but now that I've read both of these books, I can say with a lot of confidence if you liked that one, you're gonna love this one. It's very similar. So we follow Theodora Attings and her thing is she only has half a soul. She was cursed by a fairy back in the day and now she's only got half a soul left, and this makes her very different from anybody else. She has no sense of fear or abandonment, and next to feeling different, this also makes her very prone to scandals because she just says the darnedest things. And we follow her as she goes into the London season to all these balls, and at one of the balls she meets the Lord Sorcier, Elias Wilder, and he's very taken with her condition. He wants to know what's going on, and Theodora may just find out that you can still fall in love with only half a soul. This is such a warm, light-hearted, lovely read. It has a little bit of that fantasy element, like there's definitely some stakes but none of them are too high. The settings are cozy and beautiful. The romance is lovely and sweet as strawberries in the summer. There's some mystery at play as well. The synopsis says Bridgerton meets Howl's Moving Castle and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I do know that there's more books in this series, so actually I should get to the next one because I'm just now reminded of how much I liked this book at the time. Now the next book on my list is one that I've read this year. This is The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. I didn't really like the covers, so I took the dust jacket off, so I just have this naked hardback. But I'll put a little picture up here so you can see now. So in The Bodyguard, we surprisingly enough follow a bodyguard, who would have thought? And she's always protecting people. Sometimes she's just the security, other times it's like an important figure that needs a bodyguard. But then she gets into a really special situation because just as she's broken up with her awful boyfriend, by the way, literally easily one of the worst male characters I've ever read in books, and I've read plenty of horrible male characters in books. I just want to say, Robbie Bobby, I hate you. I think you're awful. And she's just broken up with him. I'm sorry if you consider that a spoiler. It's like literally at the very, very start of the book. It's like what jumpstarts the whole thing. And then she's assigned to this new thing, and it is to become a bodyguard for Jack Stapleton, who's like this famous rom-com actor in this world. Literally the only thing our main girlie wants to do is just get out of there. She wants to be assigned to a job that is far away, preferably in a different country or even on a different continent if possible. But her boss is like, no, I'm putting you on Jack Stapleton. She's like, I don't want to be bodyguarding Jack Stapleton. And I'm reading it and I'm like, why not? But she just wants to grieve her relationship, which I guess is understandable. She ends up in this really awkward fake dating situation and her boyfriend can see her with Jack Stapleton all the time on the security cameras because he also works for the same company. She gets caught up in a lot of very funny situations. This book is just very funny overall. I love Catherine Center's sense of humor. I think all of the characters were so lovable as well. I just really, really enjoyed this read. It's such a sweet, light, easy read. I think perfect for on the beach as well, and I highly recommend it. I'm really curious to check out some other Catherine Center books as well in the future, so if you have any recommendations, let me know. So I'm recommending to you Safo by Safo. This is a collection of all Safo's poetry. There's lots of different translations and selections out there. This is just one I've read and really enjoyed. Now, I think this is technically the oldest work of writing I've ever read because Safo was alive around 630 years before Christ, which is so long ago. I cannot even even comprehend that. But I think safo is where our original word for sapphic derives from. I might be wrong. I'm so sorry if you're a linguist and you're watching this and you're like, that's wrong. So Safo wrote a lot of poetry. Most of it is about love, but lots of it is also about family and religion. And I love her writing. I think it is so beautiful and intimate, and some of it is very sensual as well. I just think it's so interesting how a piece of work can survive for so long and be translated time and time and time again, and then be passed down from person to person and end up in books, and those books end up in different editions, different translations. So Safo composed all these lines, and there's different fragments and different interpretations and like poems left from that, because of course their work is so old. And I think especially if you're sapphic, it's just so lovely to read that women have always loved women. There's always been gay women, and I think to read about that from the perspective of a woman so long ago is just so beautiful. And even if you're not gay, it's so wild how everybody can still see pieces of themselves, of a girl just wanting to love and feeling so deeply within a work that is so old, and to have that sort of similarity cross over this entire bridge of time, that is just so beautiful, and one of the things I love about reading the most. So even though I'm not always the biggest on poetry, sometimes I'm not sure I can understand it all, this poetry definitely got to me and I loved it a lot, and I highly recommend you to pick up some of Safo's work sometime, whether you're gay or not. I think it's beautiful. Okay, next up on my list is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. I've talked about this book a lot in the recent months, so I'm sorry if you follow me frequently and you've seen me talk about it 1,000 times, but I just think this book is such a good and interesting look at grief and processing things and family and dealing with your family and loving your family, but things being complicated sometimes, and falling in love and feeling displaced, and it's beautiful. So we follow a ghostwriter who can see ghosts. So Florence can actually see ghosts, and at the same time she's a ghostwriter for a very famous romance author. Not a lot of people know she's the ghostwriter though, so that's an interesting predicament. And despite her family owning a funeral home, her father is the only one she knows that can also see ghosts. And Florence has just gotten a new editor. They didn't really get along. They had a horrible first meeting when she gets home to deal with an unexpected family tragedy. Who turns up at her doorstep as a ghost? Her new editor, Banji Ender, who's apparently recently deceased somehow because he's there. I loved the dynamic between Banji and Florence. I think they are such a fun pairing, and I love them both trying to work out why he's there and them both trying to work through their own things. Going into this book, I had no idea how that was going to go, because I was like, that seems doomed. I loved this story. It's so bittersweet. Next up on my list is Dial A for Aunties by Jessie Sutanto. This is one of my favorite series. It combines crime and romance, and it is just genuinely so hilarious, like laugh out loud funny. We follow Maddie Chan, and she's been set up by her abundance of aunties to go on a blind date, and her blind date is horrible, and then she accidentally kills him. And of course she calls for help. She calls her aunties and they will save the day once again. Her family has a wedding business, and it's like the biggest event they have all year, a gigantic wedding, and they have to deal with the body of this man that she killed. And then Maddie also runs into her ex again because he works for the wedding venue. So there's like lots of things happening here. All of the aunties are so funny. I love this kind of dynamic between family and romance, and like family members sort of meddling in your love life. That's something I think a lot of young women that are single, whose family does not want them to be single, can relate to. And this book is just hilarious. It's such a weird scenario, but it's so good and it works so well. Then the next one on my list is a book I have just finished, like literally today. This is The Husbands by Holly Gramazio. This book was such a wild ride. I'm not entirely sure what I thought of it yet. The concept is so interesting that it lifted the entire thing for me and it kept me to want reading. So we follow Lauren, and she comes home from her friend's bachelorette party, and then all of a sudden there's a man in her house. And she's like, oh my god, who are you? I'm calling the police. And he's like, I'm your husband. And she's like, what do you mean? And then she looks on her phone and he's there on the lock screen. And she looks at the living room and there's photos of them on their wedding day. And she looks in her phone and they text and like, she's married to him. And she's like, where did he come from? What is going on? Am I married? I did not know I was married. And then her husband goes into the attic to get something for her. And then when he comes down, he's an entirely different man that she's also somehow married to, and the first man is gone, as if that never happened. And she discovers that her attic has this weird magical supply of husbands, and every time she sends one back up, another one comes back down. and it's wild. This book had a lot of interesting critique on dating culture, on if there is such a thing as finding the one. It felt a little bit directionless, but at the same time, maybe that was kind of the point. I'm not sure yet. Like, it needs to linger a little bit more before I can fully decide my opinion on this. But I read it so quickly, within 2 days, because the whole plot is just so interesting and there's so many things happening and going on all the time. Although I do have to say it got very repetitive at some point. When we're on like husband number 300, I was like, okay, maybe she should just pick one and go with it. Also, I disagree with so many of the things our main character did. Like, she is truly so chaotic. But apart from all that, this book is just genuinely hilarious. There were so many weird situations, and the main character being very chaotic makes for even weirder situations and like horrible decisions that definitely make the book more interesting. And it gave me so much to think about as well when it comes to dating and being with people, and like how your life definitely sort of shapes and molds to different partners you're with, and how that can change you and what things stay the same. So lots of food for thought, but definitely a book I recommend. Now, there's one more book I want to recommend before we're going into books that are still on my TBR. That book is Dolly Alderton's Ghosts. A common theme a lot of these books have is that they're very funny, and this book is no exception. I always love the way Dolly Alderton makes me giggle out loud when reading her books. In this one, we follow Nina Dean. She's a successful food writer. She lives in London, and everything is kind of going for her, except that she's 32 and she's still not in a committed relationship that she would really want to be. And you should be aware going into this book that it's not really the classic romance that you may be expecting. It's definitely something that sort of diverts expectations, just like the previous book I talked about actually, and I guess the one before that as well. And lots of people in Nina's life feel like ghosts, like their lives are changing as they're getting married and meeting partners and even getting children, and their priorities change, and she feels kind of left behind. She's also dealing with her father who has Alzheimer's, which is really hard on her as well. And then she finally meets the perfect man through a dating app, and everything seems perfect, but is it really? I think what the former book I recommended lacked a bit, a clear conclusion. Like, I left that feeling a bit confused about what we're supposed to take from it. Like, there was a lot of interesting thoughts there, but I wasn't sure what the author was trying to say. I feel Dolly Alderton did that really well in this book, in the sense that this is clearly a criticism on dating culture and on how it sometimes makes us view people as disposable, and how different it can be to stay single when so many people around you seem to be moving on and doing the thing they're supposed to do. Now, I'm not 32, so I'm probably being really dramatic when I say that at 26 I felt this. And it showed me that there's so much more to life than meeting a partner, and that things are going to change regardless. Things are going to change around you all the time, because that is just the way the world is. I feel like I'm really being unnecessarily personal in this video, but yeah, I just really love this book, and I love lots of things that Dolly Alderton writes, so I do recommend it. The next book on my list is How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kwong. Yulin Kwong is actually Emily Henry's screenwriter, so there's going to be films coming out from Emily Henry's books, and Yulin Kwong is the screenwriter for those, so that made me immediately exciting, because that made me exciting. I mean, I'm plenty of exciting already. That made me excited because I love Emily Henry's books. So we follow Helen Zhang, and she is also a screenwriter in this story. And many years ago, she was in a tragic accident with Grant Shepherd, and when she moves back to LA, she's not expecting him to be there at all. She's a best-selling author. She's going to work on the TV adaptation of her novels. She's really excited to be there. LA is going to be a fresh start for her, but guess what? When she gets there, Grant Shepherd is also there. He's not really moved on. Actually, he's done everything to not move on, and they immediately have that spark again, but of course his place in her life is really difficult because of the accident, and the other way around as well. And it says here, when secrets come to light, they must reckon with the fact that theirs was never meant to be any kind of love story, and yet the key to making peace with their past and themselves might just lie in holding on to each other in the present. That sounds really lovely, and exactly like the kind of fresh take on a love story I really enjoy reading. This is something I've just realized through making this video. The cover is also stunning, and next to all of these things, I just love books that are set in like the TV world, like the glitz and glamour of LA, and like the writing room, and like on set. I don't know, I always love reading about that. So I'm excited to eventually get to this book as well. Now, the next book on my list is once again one that combines homicide with a love story. Don't ask. We're not going to talk about my tastes. This series is called the Happily Ever Homicide series, which moment of silence for that, please. And the first book is called Juniper Bean Resorts to Murder. Now look at that cover. That cover is so cute. You would not think that the series that this belongs to is called Happily Ever Homicide, okay? So in this book, we follow an aspiring romance writer. Her name is Juniper Bean, which, can I just say, adorable. I want to be called Juniper Bean, actually. She loves writing about those swoony kisses and happily ever afters, but she can't really stop getting her characters killed. She finally decides it's time to make a genre switch and maybe just write mysteries. She enlists the help of her very unwilling roommate Aileen, and she starts doing research about writing mysteries. And this is already very funny to me because as a writer, you Google the weirdest things. Like, I've Googled so many unhinged things trying to write a scene. Little plug, by the way, if you want to, I make writing vlogs on here as well, and I would love if you check those out. Then Juniper's plans to write a mystery novel go absolutely haywire when she finds an actual dead body in the woods. This was, of course, not part of the plan. Before she knows it, she's all wrapped up in this murder investigation, trying to figure out who killed the girl in the woods, and also if she has some blossoming feelings for Aileen. This book has such a good rating. Everybody seems to love it. It sounds like the perfect mix of things I love: a cozy mystery next to also being a little bit unhinged, funny, adorable, has mushrooms on the cover. I don't know what else I could ask for. I also just really look forward to telling people I'm reading the Happily Ever Homicide series. That sounds delightfully unhinged. Now, my last but not least book on this list that I still want to read is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. Everybody around me just seems to love Abby Jimenez, so I was like, maybe I should give it a go because it does sound interesting. So we follow Alexis Montgomery, who's an ER doctor, and now one thing you need to know about me is that I love watching hospital TV shows, so reading about an ER doctor already is appealing to me. And it says here, she has had her world turned upside down. The cause, Daniel Grant, a ridiculously hot carpenter who's 10 years younger than her and as casual as they come. The complete opposite of sophisticated city girl Alexis, and yet their chemistry is undeniable. I love reading about this dynamic as well, and I love the idea that these people are so different but they have so much chemistry. And I'm also really into the whole idea that she is being pressured by her family to become this thing that she doesn't want to be, and then he's showing her what she's really supposed to see in the world and the things that truly matter, and that's what I'm getting from this synopsis. Bringing Daniel to her world is impossible, and yet she can't just give up the joy she's found with him either. With so many differences between them, how can Alexis possibly choose between her world and his? So let me know if you've read this book. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on it. Okay, so those were the 10 books on my list for you today. I really hoped you enjoyed this video, you had a good time watching it, and you have some new romance recommendations. Don't forget to check out my web shop if you want to support me as a YouTuber and an artist. I make a really cute bookish goodies, even if I say so myself, and I really love selling my art to you guys online. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a little romantic emoji for me in the comments down below if you don't know what to comment. I hope you have a lovely day, and I'll see you in my next video. Thanks, bye!